pleasure to welcome you to the event called The EU We Have versus the EU We Need. We have such a good turnout on Friday afternoon, and we are going to kick off with our event with a keynote address by Balázs Hidvégi, Deputy Minister and Parliamentary State Secretary of the Prime Minister's Cabinet Office. Mr. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for the invitation. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a timely discussion. I should say right away. We're talking about the EU, what kind of EU we have and what kind of EU we would need. Let me just highlight a few points that we can, I think, later on then discuss with the panel. Historically and institutionally, there is obviously a line of development for European cooperation, which was begun by nation states that decided to link first their economies closely together and then increasingly link themselves politically in an effort to avoid military conflict, avoid war that the previous century saw way too often in Europe. And in that effort, they created institutions that would make this cooperation work on an everyday basis. Central institutions that were supposed to be serving the interests of the nation states cooperating. And against that background, what we see now, and we see that especially in the case of Hungary, with the political battles and discussions with EU institutions, we see an increasingly politicized debate, or rather I should say even further, an increasingly political crisis that is at the heart of how the EU functions. My analysis is that the core of the problem is in Brussels, and it is to be seen and to be found in the increasingly changing role that the central institutions would like to create for themselves. And that is really the point, I think, that we should look at. What's the reason for such a change following decades of cooperation and indeed a long period of peace within the European Union, or previously the Common Market and European Community? One could say that one reason could be the lack of a strong political leadership by the member states. So the bureaucracy likes to, or would like to take more roles and more responsibilities for itself, more powers, because member states don't really act politically. They're not decisive enough. They don't have a vision, etc. So that could be one explanation. And evidently, this is a criticism mostly of the larger member states of the Union, or their political leadership, or the lack thereof. The other element that I think we should mention is to be found in bureaucracy itself, and it's a general rule. All bureaucracies tend to grow. They like themselves, they like to create new offices, they like to, list newer and newer tasks and things for them to do, and they tend to grow, and they tend to centralize, and that seems to be a problem of all bureaucracies around the world. It's not only a European or Brussels problem, but it is a problem nevertheless. That has its own dynamic. By this decade in which we are, starting already, I think, with the migration crisis 10 years ago, this crisis has entered a new level. And it's a more serious level, and consequently the conflicts, the political difficulties also have risen as a result of that. And why is it a new level? What has happened? Well, let me just give you a few examples that I think are important here. To sum up, I think we have entered a new level of this problem because now the centralized Brussels-based institutions they've entered a territory or territories that touch upon very basic and fundamental values and foundations really of Europe and European countries. And let me give you the examples. One such example is identity of who we are. And evidently, the crisis or the topic most related to that is migration, mass migration, the acceptance of illegal migration. And instead of a fight against that, really turning it around in Brussels and proclaiming it to be a desirable thing. And they keep saying that migration is good, that it's inevitable, and all we need to do is manage it. That's a whole new way of talking about the issue, and it's linked directly to identity of who are we as Europeans and who are we going to be in the next few years. What is going to happen to our children, to the next generations? What is going to be Europe in the future if migration continues like that? So one area, identity, who we are, is now under attack. It's challenged by the Brussels institutions. Let me give another one. Sovereignty. National sovereignty. The EU was founded as a cooperation of sovereign member states, nation states, that politically made the decision to cooperate because of their interest and because of their convictions and determination. And now sovereignty is under attack. It's challenged by a commission that is increasingly acting as a political body. It was, I think, Jean-Claude Juncker, the previous Commission president, who said that he wanted a political commission, and that is continued, obviously and very clearly, by Ursula von der Leyen, who acts as a political leader as opposed to a bureaucratic leader, as opposed to a leader of an institution that is supposed to serve the member states. So sovereignty is under attack, and not only by the Commission, but also by the Court. The European Court is making political decisions. Its president also said that he thought one of his main goals was to promote an ever closer union. Well, a court should not promote an ever closer union. A court should actually interpret laws. That's what a court should do. What he was talking about, working for an ever closer union, is a political activity. Next thing that I want to mention is moral foundations, ethical questions. What is family? What is valuable? What are we there to protect? How we look at families. What is a family? How to raise children. And this is obviously linked to the very aggressive and now omnipresent LGBTQ, etc., ideology. It is an ideology. It's not about, how you treat people with different sexual orientations. It's an ideology that wants to over-dominate everything, that wants to go into schools and kindergartens and change the way we think and change the way our children think, which is even worse. Also, obviously, a lack of religious commitment, or rather the acceptance of religion and the Christian tradition in Europe as our moral foundation. It was already on the agenda as a problem back in 2004, 3 and 4, when we had the European Convent or Convention to create the European Constitution. We Hungarians were just about to enter the EU, and our politicians were invited to already take part in that convent that preceded our formal membership in May 2004. And we, stood up for including Christianity, a reference to Christianity in the European Constitution in its preamble, and that was not supported back then already, although that convent was directed by or chaired by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, and still, a conservative politician, but even he didn't support the idea. So there was already the signs of some great trouble there. Next thing I want to mention is security, everyday security. How do people feel in their homes, in their countries, in their cities or villages? Are they secure? And do they look at the European Union and the Brussels institutions as actors that work for them to have their security, so that they feel secure at home? Or are they doing something else with mass migration, with an attack on authority, on moral foundations? Very often, I think that's what people feel, that these institutions don't represent them. They are standing up for some other interest, which is not theirs. Attacks on the police force or even the army. Next thing, competitivity and economic strength or economic well-being. That's under attack by an over-ideologized quest for the Green Deal. That's what we have seen over the past couple of years. And although there is some self-criticism now, I don't see an overarching change from the ill-conceived policies of the past few years. And linked to that, and also linked to the issue of security, is the joint debt. There's increasing talk now in Brussels about European debt, so that we can take loans together. COVID was the first such thing that sort of broke the ice. We already were, Hungarians, very critical of that. We don't want to be jointly in debt with the EU members, fellow member states. We don't think it's a good idea, but after COVID we said, okay, well, once we accept that with the recovery fund. And now we see that there is a political blackmail against us because of our political line, the conservative Christian democratic agenda. And some of the money that we were part in taking as a loan is not given to us because they don't like what we do about migration, what we do about family, etc., etc. So there is that also. Rule of law, or the democracy shield, which I think also will feature the agenda of this meeting, they sound good, but really they remind me of Newspeak from 1984, where words mean the exact opposite of what they're supposed to mean. The rule of law, warfare against conservative governments is a shame to the whole European Union, and it's obviously not the right way forward. And then we are in geopolitically very dangerous point right now. We are in the shadow of the war in Ukraine. And I can say with some pride here today that it is a major achievement of the Hungarian Prime Minister and his continuous and very consistent efforts for peace and for negotiations that we should be able to welcome the American President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin here in Budapest for peace talks, and that's the right way forward. And it's in a stunning contradiction to what Brussels is doing and has been doing. They have been very quiet since last night. They must have had a difficult evening yesterday when the news broke, because it's so much in contrast with what they're trying to do. But they are not on the right track in that either. And again, I don't think they represent the majority of the European people and what the people would like to see, because I'm convinced that the people would like to see peace, and they appreciate efforts that help peace and help negotiations. So we've got, I think, a strong list of problems and a strong list of things that create a crisis politically in Brussels and in the European Union. Let's see what we can say about that in the panel. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for your words, Deputy Minister. And now we are going to move to the actual panel discussion that is going to be moderated by our Deputy Director for Operations, Gergely Dobozi. And the panelists are going to be Balázs Hidvégi, the Deputy Minister, is going to stay for us for the discussion too. Daniel Hinst, founder and former president, current board member of the Center for Public Policy and Economic Analysis, our guest from Croatia. And Peter Kružlic, head of department at the University of Szeged, Faculty of Political Science and Law. And at last but not least, Stefano Arocche, visiting fellow at the Danube Institute.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming here, and we respect that you are here with us on a Friday afternoon. So we want to serve that trust. So our topic is about the EU and its current state of it. The latest development for this discussion is the news that came out on Tuesday, which is about a trial, a court proceeding in front of the European Court of Justice, where the European Parliament is suing the European Commission for not punishing Hungary enough, and there is 10.2 billion euros at stake, and these amounts are already approved by the European Commission related to the legal framework of the so-called rule of law conditionality mechanism. So we are entitled to this amount of money, even in the labyrinth of within the framework of this horrible labyrinth. Not mentioning the amounts that is Hungary entitled to otherwise within the framework of the budget. So what we have now is that institution A wants to beat up institution B before institution C for not punishing member state enough. So this is where we are currently. This is the EU what we currently have. And the question is this the EU what we need? And please, Stefano, make some comments on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gergely. Well, I would like to rewind a little bit from your question, and because to answer this is to speak of the interinstitutional dynamics and disputes within the EU, and they have never been harmonious on the least. And for that matter, I have brought a quote that is from the first president of the European Commission, back when it was called the European Communities, that was delivered in 1956, Walter Hallstein, when he said, and this goes on the line of the major debate that I think permeates the right, in the sense of to what extent can we have an economic integration without excessive political integration, and whether that was the goal in the first place. When speaking about, at the time, the European Communities, there was only 6 member states, the founding 6, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, West Germany, Italy, and France. Hallstein said, "Our paramount concern is not economic or technical integration in this or that sphere, but the political unification of Europe. We refute the contention that economic integration can advance while political integration is shelved. In the interest of our freedom and culture, the freedom and culture of the West, we must insist on and give priority to political integration and regard any form of economic part integration as a mere stage on the road to it." This was said at a time when economic integration was being built, and the level of political integration we have at the moment was, for most Europeans, unthinkable. Why am I bringing this here? It is to say that the politicization of the EU, in my view, is not an accident. It is something that happened by design. It is something that had always been wired in at least one of its institutions, which is the European Commission. The European Commission that acts as the executive power and what is called the sole guardian of the treaties, meaning it proposes the laws, the EU legal devices, and it is the one institution that is responsible for holding member states accountable to its rules. Now, the Commission is being sued by the Parliament because it allegedly failed to comply with this request when it, in the Parliament's view, allowed Hungary to access some of these funds. Why is this happening? Well, firstly, because there has never been proper harmony amongst the institutions. There is, other than a power dispute, the Parliament has historically wanted to get more powers from the Commission in particular. And it has often done so through legal means. There is a very strong wing in the European Parliament, dare I say the majority of MEPs, that subscribes to this very strongly federalist view of Europe. A federalist view where an alternative form of governance, a form of governance and a form of the European project that would disagree with this quote from 1956 that I have just read is inconceivable. A form of governance where the end goal is not the dissolution of national states within an ever-growing bureaucracy, as a deputy minister put very well, bureaucracies like themselves and like to grow in their powers and their competences. But a form of the European project that is based on a more confederal model of sovereign states delegating powers in a limited way in accordance to their own national interests, which was the line that was followed all the way until the late 1980s by most of the national governments of Europe. So what is happening now, what we're seeing now, is another chapter in this decades-long dispute between a federalist wing that is mostly represented and entrenched in Brussels, Strasbourg, and Luxembourg, and I wouldn't call sovereigntist, but a less federalistic wing that still believes that the EU must be a community of sovereign member states. Now, the role of the court in this is interesting because, in theory, it should act as a neutral arbiter, and it has, in many occasions, it has acted like this. But in other occasions, for example, when it decided to fine Hungary €1 million a day for not changing a policy that is essentially a national level competence, it has, as the deputy minister put it, acted on the service of a project that is ultimately political, while it should retain its political independence. What we're seeing now is the EU we have, which is ever more political, and that is partly by design. Is this the EU we need? Is this model being favorable for most member states, let alone for the European project itself, for the idea of European integration, which is, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of most here present, a net positive? Well, I don't think so, but I would love to hear from the other members of the panel as well.
The first time I've been taught about the European Union was around 2008 or 9, and back in those days the European Parliament was the way they referred to the European Parliament was something something similar to a paper tiger. Now, Deputy Minister, formerly you've been serving as a European parliamentary representative. How do you assess the influence of that body now?
Of the European Parliament?
Of the European Parliament, yes.
Well, it's an interesting institution. It calls itself a parliament. It's directly elected since 1979. But it does not have the same powers as a national parliament. It acts together with the council on many occasions. It also does not initiate European law. It's the Commission that does that. So it's an interesting conundrum. And I think I tend to agree with what we've heard. It has always tried to further widen its sphere of authority and its own powers. There is an unfortunate inward lookingness inside. When I got there as a deputy 6 years ago, I was surprised to see how many members of the European Parliament, once they get elected, start to act differently than they did before, and they start to think and act in terms of an imagined European sphere. You know, they tend to stick to Brussels and not get out of that bubble, and consequently lose touch with their own voters who sent them there, lose touch with their home countries and electorates. And very often I think they're on the wrong track on key issues. And they either don't want to speak out of that because it's more comfortable to just say what people expect there to hear, you know, to stay within the bubble. It's more comfortable than to speak out of it. It also is easier because then they don't get criticized by the press. There's also a very left-wing, very federalist press, especially in Brussels, but also in other parts of Europe, which then will attack anyone who dares to speak out of that bubble or out of that logic and talks about national interest, etc. So there is that in the European Parliament, but there is also hope. We have formed the Patriots for Europe. Although they're still trying to, you know, keep us out of positions and keep us behind the cordon sanitaire, but the right and the sovereigntist political forces are getting stronger, and that's my hope. And I think that's important that we work together with other parties from other countries that think differently, that think similarly to us about what is good European cooperation, what the role of nation states should remain.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hinst, you are from Croatia, member state to join the European Union in 2011. And it were those days when Hungary has been only started to be in focus of this so-called power game among the institutions and the bunch of institutions against Hungary. So considering the developments of these years, if you were the one to chose to get involved into the European process or stay out of it, what would be your decision now?
Well, it is always good to support the European Union, and the question is what kind of European Union we have. So that is the title of our panel discussion today. And it's not black-white questions. So we already have some good basis for the EU, but we also have cases that are not so good, and they have been mentioned by Deputy Minister in his introductory speech. So the question is, are we going to reform the European Union? So in that way, we need as many member states as possible, including Croatia, Hungary, countries that are part of the 3 Cs initiative. They have, I have a good feeling that they have a little bit different perspective. Even Poland, regardless of the government. The case that you mentioned now that the Parliament is going against the Commission is just, a fresh case of the EU overreach. But we already have a policy legacy of the EU overreach. So that doesn't mean the EU is not good. We shouldn't leave it. However, we need to reform it in order to prevent what happened, for example, in the UK with Brexit, because there are some benefits, but there are also costs. And what was mentioned previously, yes, we testify now a very wrong idea of federalism. A very classical idea of federalism means that there are free and very sovereign, powerful states coming together, and then they are transferring a very limited amount of sovereignty to the federation. But it will not happen realistically with the European Union, because the basis is not the same. We can even question whether the United States is a federal country anymore, given the overreach of the federal government against the 10th Amendment, which does not grant too many authorities of Congress, for example, with Obamacare or with some other policies. Yeah. So we need to be together here in the European Union, and we are neighboring countries, regardless of some party opinions. I think that the next European Parliament will open up more space for really conservative forces, well, the classical liberal conservative forces. Patriotism is a good thing. It should not be very exclusive, willing to leave the European Union, but the question is, what is the problem with patriotism that many people on the left think that it necessarily goes to extreme right policies? Well, it's very usual to hear such words. So we need to create a good coalition, because currently what we have in the European Parliament is grosse coalition. Well, we have EPP, which is not strong enough, and then we have the liberals, which are not liberal in a classical sense anymore, and then we have socialists and even Greens who support some of the policies of the current Commission. So we testify to the mixture of compromises, well, since you have center-left and the center-right, and I think we deserve a much better European Union. When I say union, that means doing less in terms of competencies, but doing much better in improving the governance where there is a policy basis, and that's the market integration, which is still not over, and some competencies that are really necessary at the level of the European Union. But these competencies are very few. So that's the problem for those on the left, because they would like the increased number of competencies. Now we have the European equality strategy. Well, of course, nobody would like to be against equality, but now it's a misleading concept, and you can easily blame somebody or a certain member state for not respecting human rights or the rule of law just because of some national cultural specifics. So that is a risk not just for Hungary, but also for other member states. Unfortunately, Hungary is now the one that is on the peak, but in reality, there are much more member states that have the same issue and that have solidarity with Hungary. It is, at the end, it is about freedom, and the overreach is not something that we should support, but rather the limited government. And the only way we can have the rule of law is with the limited government and with respect to the individual and national freedom.
Thank you. Professor Kružlic, by means of law, what is your assessment towards this procedure I mentioned, considering the terminology the Deputy Minister used in his opening speech, lawfare? So how do you assess the outcome of this procedure?
Thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation. It's always difficult as a lawyer to speak about European integration. Because you know, European integration is, we tell our students about economical integration. But from the very beginning, does it work? It works? Okay. From the very beginning, the basic tool to make this integration happen was law. You remember the famous cases at the beginning of European integration that was about to establish a proper, an own legal system for this European integration, and actually it is the force of the European integration. At the same time, this is, as I can quote many professors, not the traditional legal framework that we are used to in public law, especially. Of course, there was a specific international public law and there was a constitutional law in Europe, and now European integration tries to use those ideas of traditional, I would say, traditional international law and classical constitutional law. However, in the framework of the European Union, it means something completely different. And it's not so complicated to understand, because even the legal system of the European integration was based on the idea of efficiency. And efficiency, I don't want to be too technical, but efficiency is not something that is related to law. Usually, law is not looking for efficiency. But here, the whole concept for the European integration is efficiency. So, when we speak about the Court of Justice does not work in the idea to judge something legal or against the law, but it works on the idea how to make more efficient the implication, the implementation of the EU law. And that is happening all the time. If you look on the case law of the European Court, so the Court of Justice of the European Union, every time in the argumentation you can find those ideas how to make the application of the different legal acts more efficient. And it is actually, and then we can discuss, of course, it would be an interesting but mostly theoretical question whether this is a program which can be even qualified as a political program, or whether this is something that a lawyer should do. To come back to your question, just a couple of ideas about this institutional constellation, or I don't even know how to call it. There is over there as well a huge problem about the institutions of the European Union. And Deputy Minister told us that European Parliament is not a parliament. European Commission is not a government, and the Council is not an intergovernmental body, as we used to know intergovernmental cooperation in different international organizations. So nothing is what it seems to be or what it wants to be. And that's a huge problem, because how you can draw a legal framework to an institutional conglomerate where all the different actors try to do something else that they should or that they are meant to do. That is basically the problem, because, and then we can go into details. You know, the European Parliament tries to make what a parliament does, means political narrative, not representation, of course, because as it was mentioned, European Parliament is not a real representative body of anyone. You can read in the treaty that European Parliament represents European citizens. But European citizenship, we know that from the legal perspective, is something complementary to national citizenship. It's not creating a proper identity, a political community-like nation. So even there is a basic problem. And then when you would like to create political narrative, you will do many things that you are not sensed to do. I have some colleagues who made research on the work of European Parliament, and they revealed that more than the half of the decision made by European Parliament is not in the field of competence of the European Parliament. Which is completely possible, because if you are the Parliament, you do what you want to do. No problem with that. At the same time, we don't ask them to do so, because in the treaty, we described what is the role of the European Parliament. And then it was mentioned, European Commission tries to be a political commission. But according to the treaty, this is a technical and administrative body. And then we are blaming European Commission, not me, but some people are blaming European Commission not to be political enough. But how to be political if you are designed to be a technical administration? And even the leadership of the European Commission, as it was mentioned, Juncker and now van der Leyen, the presidents, Juncker said political commission, van der Leyen said geopolitical commission. So even step outside of Europe, which is completely not the role of a European Commission. And then at the Council, there is this problem of leadership that we also mentioned. Then I just told about European Court, which is not a real court. I mean, not judging cases according to something is legal or something is illegal, which should be the role of the judge, interpretation of the text, and deciding whether something complies or does not comply with the text. And then we have crisis, we have economical problem, but once again, what Parliament does is suing Commission about a decision. We will see, I am a little bit hesitant about this case, because European Court does not like to act against Commission. So even though it is about Hungary, I'm not sure about, but once again, this is meteorology. I cannot say what will happen in the future.
answering your question regarding whether it's whether the whole European project is current in its current state is a poorly designed skeleton to function, helping whether it's a program or it's or a framework which should operate by means of rule of law standards. I think my answer for that is that it is a program. The source code for it is the principle of an ever closer union, which is embedded in the core text of the founding treaties. Stefano, how do you assess the relevance of the program of an ever closer union?
Well, it is, as I said before, even decades before this was written into law, this was already the goal. It has always been the goal of the European Commission and its preceding agencies to have an ever closer union. The European project was born after the Second World War out of a desire to avoid further confrontations in the European soil. Of course, there were several wings, several schools of thought on how far this union should go, how to account for political differences, legal differences, cultural differences. But some of the most influential ones argued that an ever closer union that would eventually lead to what you could call a United States of Europe or a European superstate, or however one would like to name such a hypothetical polity, would be the desired goal. This is, of course, not said publicly. I don't think you would ever hear Madame von der Leyen say that she would want to be the president of the United States of Europe. But when one is saying an ever closer union, one ought to ask, well, what is the end goal? How close is close enough and how close is too close? And by leaving this question open, it is implied that the answer is there is no such thing as too close. So the whole idea of an ever closer union has been the driving force behind many of the pushes that we now call political and legal overreach by the European Commission to accrue more power through legal devices, oftentimes through precedent rather than through legal precedent rather than through legal text, either whether through the treaties or through the approval of regulations, which would obviously not have been accepted by the Council, where you need a qualified majority to approve most EU legal devices. And the court has been very helpful in this regard. During the COVID pandemic, we have seen the Commission justified by the argument that this was a public health emergency, greatly overstepping powers that would have legally been only reserved to the states. Most recently, we have seen in Slovakia the approval of a constitutional amendment that recognized that there are only two genders, male and female. This is regardless of what one might think about this is a purely national matter, as family policy and cultural policy are the competence of the member states. As per Article 5 of the Treaty on the European Union, anything that is not delegated to the EU based on principles of subsidiarity are competence of the member states. This is a purely internal matter, and this is an amendment that was crafted by one of the foremost legal experts in Slovakia. And the European Commission hasn't yet officially commented on the matter, but several members of the European Parliament and off the record, some people within the Commission have been open to the possibility of initiating legal action against Bratislava over this act, alleging that it would be discriminating against certain groups of people. Now, the amendment does not curtail any rights, nor does it foresee any punishment for someone who would choose not to identify with the two constitutionally defined categories. Nevertheless, the Commission and the European Union have been open to the possibility of challenging this in court. And by challenging this in court, you would open a precedent for saying, should the court rule in favor of Brussels in this hypothetical case, the court would open to the possibility of saying, well, family policy is now a shared competence, which means it's a national competence until it isn't, until it falls within the scope of the Union. And this is just an example for a dynamic that has repeated itself many times over the past decades, and this has happened all the way since the 1960s, really. And it is often through this way, through the use of the court and through the use of legal, one could say, overreach, that the EU has managed to accrue so much power to accomplish this goal of the ever closer union that is indeed in the treaties, even by overstepping boundaries that by the same treaties it should not overstep.
Thank you. Speaking of overreach, given that after the latest Polish elections, Hungary became the only subject of the so-called rule of law conditionality mechanism, we are talking about a mechanism which gives full power to the European Commission to somehow curb the sovereignty of member states by invoking some principles of the rule of law. Please elaborate on what fields of policy do you think the European Commission tried to interfere into state sovereignty by referring to this kind of regulation?
Well, that's going to be a long list, actually, in the case of of Hungary. And I want to remind everyone how before the Italian government led by Meloni was formed, she got messages by von der Leyen, by others, that their money could be in danger if they're not in line and they don't behave. And just you don't have to wait very long. There's a new Czech government being formed. I'm sure that they will be under similar pressure as they were, or Prime Minister Babiš was previously. And there are also attacks on the Slovak government these days. So there's a pattern, a very clear pattern. When we talk about ever closer union, in the treaty it says ever closer union between the peoples of Europe. So it talks about cooperation between nations and their wish to work together, and that's fine. And as far as the original meaning is there, it's okay. But unfortunately, it has been derailed, and now we see an ever closer union of Brussels bureaucrats, lining up against nation states, and that's not good. Or we see an ever closer union between the mobile phone of von der Leyen and the Pfizer chief, which then they refuse to make public, and that's not good either. That's just not acceptable. The overreach and this rule of law warfare against us is really on, as I said in the beginning, on key issues. And when we talk about national identity and the right for nations to protect themselves and to maintain their identity as a national community, then obviously the allowance and in fact the support of mass foreign migration into Europe is an evident danger to that. The two cannot go together. You cannot maintain your identity, your cultural identity or your freedom as a nation if you allow, hundreds of thousands or millions of migrants, most of them illegal, to come into your country. And Brussels and the Commission wants to define that. They want to have the right to define who to accept, where to put them, quotas, distribution, etc., etc. Even the latest new migration pact, what they call it, is the same thing. It repeats, it brings back these failed ideas that already failed 10 years ago. And this against the will of the people, because nobody can, tell us that Western European societies support, or they're glad about what they see in their cities, in their countries now. It's just, as a principle, just not acceptable. And you have to maintain your right to decide about your own future. The same thing about culture. The gentleman next to me mentioned the sexes, two genders, marriage, childbearance, etc. Those are member state competences, and they must remain member state competences. So we need to very, very clearly stick to those principles and be consistent about them. And I think we will win an increasing a number of people's votes and support across Europe if we are consistent about these things, because these go against, clearly, the European interest. Or I'll give another example. Right now in this military conflict, the EU is again not on the right track. I remember 35 years ago the Yugoslav war, when Yugoslavia disintegrated. It was called European Community. They were unable to do anything. Years passed, and in the end, what happened? Well, there was an American intervention, and the Pax Americana came, instead of a European peacemaking deal. Europe was incapable of doing anything, just on its border. And again, with this war, instead of standing up for a peace deal, for a strategic deal between Russia and the West, which is now something that the American president is trying to do, Brussels again is on the wrong track, and they keep talking about a never-ending support for Ukraine as long as it takes, without defining what is it as long as it takes. What is the goal exactly? Where do we want to go back? What is the political goal? It's not clear, and they keep sending these messages and spending billions of euros on that wrong project again. So this is what I'm talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Hinst. Croatia is part of the Eurozone and the Schengen area, so on the surface everything seems to be right. But what do you think, economically, politically, culturally speaking, what could be those collision areas which could cause some trouble and that would lead to some kind of a fight similar to what Budapest fights against Brussels?
Yes, maybe economically it looks relatively good. Yeah, where we are in the Eurozone, and it has certain economic benefits, but also maybe there are some costs. Well, I cannot judge now whether Croatia will be in the same position as Hungary, but as I said before, there are certainly several member states that are at a practical level, if we judge policies clearly in the same position as Hungary, specifically when it comes to immigration policy. Well, Croatia needs to defend the external border. It's our southern border, so we are in the same situation together with Hungary. Well, Poland now wants to opt out from migration pact, and it has the permission of the European Commission. Now the question is whether that permission will also come to other capitals, Prague, Bratislava, Zagreb, Budapest. Well, we already know what would be the answer, so it depends on the political mercy. So I think that we need to be united on a front to defend what are the rights of the member states and to keep only those limited competencies that are really necessary at EU level: market integration, competition, transnational transportation networks. There are some other policies, but they are very limited to the amount what we have now, and we have a policy inflation now. Deputy Minister already spoke about some issues: migration, European intervention in defining our cultural identities. Now we have these issues with two genders in Slovakia. It's not just Slovakia. I'm not going to now judge all policies of Socialist Prime Minister Fico. Well, it's not a topic of the panel. However, in Croatian constitution we have, for example, that marriage is a union between men and women. So practically we have the same constitutional provision as Slovakia does, and there are no consequences here. So it depends on the political momentum, and there are double and multiple standards. 10 plus years ago, when there was a national referendum, I thought, oh, we shouldn't regulate marriage by constitution because we already have a strong national marriage law. But now I see I was very naive, because we see what is the progressive context of this gender ideology. It has nothing to do with the equality of human rights, but it just puts some very blind ideas what should be the new perspective of human rights, completely separated from the human nature and the philosophy of natural law. So that's the fundamental thing we should discuss in the European Union. Whether we need the European Union based on the natural law. Okay, we are not Anglo-Saxon culture, of course, but still we need to, if we would like to see better transatlantic ties, we should learn from Americans, and especially from the Republican side, what they're doing now in reforming their country and their governments, because they also have the problem. I don't know if they're a federal government anymore, or it is just a more progressive and centralized government. But fortunately now we have a better policy course. So I am optimistic if we are going to unite across member states and to fight for a limited government in Brussels, and to fight for the respect of our national rights. If it's really about two genders, I don't know what is the problem. Okay, it's a naive question, of course. We know what it is. You know, somebody would like to tell us, oh, there is a discrimination because beside men and women there are some other people. Well, I'm not going to judge, personal convictions, but when it comes to the public and cultural sphere, things should be clear according to the nature. It's even not something connected with our Judeo-Christian tradition. It's a legacy of the global civilization. And now we see so-called globalists, they're actually going against the global tradition.
Yeah.
That's very interesting and funny.
Thank you. As someone who is strongly in favor of sovereignty, the development of Brexit was not black and white for me, because I cheered on sovereignty of the Brits. However, already in the middle of these disputes around Hungary and the European Union, I was kind of sad because Hungary lost a very strong ally in the dispute how to reform the European Union. My idea is that it's still a very strong peace project, the most successful of its kind during the history of Europe. So I think there's much to preserve. However, it's obvious for me that if it stays this way, it has to be reformed from within. Now, as a jurist, professor, how do you assess the possibility of a treaty reform?
This is a great question because there is no chance now. When I have this question all the time, I say that I consider myself as someone young, even though when I see my students, I feel myself more and more older and older. But I think that in the near future, I wouldn't say in my lifetime, because I consider myself as very young, but there is no chance to reform the treaty. Now it's completely impossible. But it's not a problem, I think, because you have many different constitutional structures for political projects. And even though you cannot change the static structure, the dynamic of functioning can change from the internal part of the structure, the way that its structure is working. So look on the states. I don't know, we can have a lot of examples. I don't want to make here a lecture about it, but you look on the United States, that has a constitution adopted a long time ago. Of course, you have these different amendments, but basically the country changed a lot, and the constitution remained the same. Look on the French Republic, the Fifth French Republic, which was designed with a strong executive body. And what we can see now in France, there is no government, or the government exists for not even a day, half a day government. So what I mean that even though you cannot redesign the treaty because you need the consensus of all the member states, which is practically impossible those days, you can, from the point of view of the functioning, change the functioning of the system. But I would like to come back a little bit, if I may, to this question of ever closer union, because I think it's an interesting question, and I would like to underline or to highlight what the Deputy Minister said, that when you read the treaty, it's funny, if I may say it so, because it's an ever closer union between the nations. There is nothing about competencies in this article of the treaty. Ever closer union, why should it mean that you need more and more competencies for European integration? The treaty describes the competencies of the European Union, and I think all the problem that we are mentioning today relates to this problem of sovereignty and competencies. It can be theoretically or doctrinally or legally described as a problem between, or a problem that you have the sovereignty of the state, and at the same time you decided, sovereign states decided to attribute competencies to the European Union. And how we deal with this question, that is the basic problem. That is the basic problem for many, many issues, and it's not so complicated, because according to the Court of Justice, only the Court of Justice decides. So this is a huge question, and the answer is so short. If the court decides that Europe has the competency, then Europe has the competency. And even though states are reluctant, they are thinking about preserving their sovereignty. They, from the legal perspective today, cannot do too much about it. And at the same time, and I will finish with this idea, there is this problem, and actually you mentioned the different policies about migration, for example, not to speak about genders, it's even more complicated. But actually I was part of a research team for 5 years working on the migration law of European Union. And the problem is very simple over there as well. You know that it depends on the countries, but usually more than 70. For some countries, more than 80% of the demand to stay in the country are refused by the national authorities. 80% for a lot of countries, but once again, for all of them, more than 70%. And what is happening? All those people already arrived to the European territory, and there is no administrative solution to send them away. And it's, once again, it's not the legal provision of the European Union, but the application of the legal provision, because the legal provision lacks the solution for the migration. And we are in front of a very simple or very obvious problem, that once you let people come in, they won't leave. And we are discussing that now for because with the migration crisis we can say it's 10 years. But even before, the first text of European Union was adopted in 2007, 2009. So we are discussing this matter now for almost 20 years, and we cannot accept the reality, the social reality, which is once again very simple. Once you let the people come in, they won't leave, even though they are not entitled according to European directives. So what can you do in this case? Europe takes the competency, even though migration, we know this is a shared field of competencies between European Union and the member state, but Europe takes the competency, makes us, as Deputy Minister said, very, a close path, what we can do and what we cannot do. There is no more political choices, and at the same time, everyone can see that the text, the acts adopted by European Union cannot give the solution to the problem.
Thank you. We don't really have much time left, so we only have time for one question only per person. So it would be this. The population of the European Union could grow through migration, but also through accession too. Considering this provocative question, if we could choose between Ukraine or the Western Balkan region, what would be your pick? And why?
It's a big question, of course, because, well, Croatia is in a position to support both Western Balkans, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo and Montenegro, Ukraine as well. I would actually ask ourselves about the accession criteria. Are we going to soften them, or are we going to insist that all criteria should be satisfied? So I'm mostly focused on the quality of criteria, because it's for the good of these potentially new member states. And of course, it's up to the decision of all member states, current member states, so any kind of new membership. We need to work on the European integration, on the European enlargement, but first we also need to work on the EU reform and on the reform of decision-making, and we should certainly not get rid of unanimity, because it's important for some member states. Yeah. So as long as, or when actually the states satisfy the criteria and the decision is prepared, well, then in that case, all these states should join the European Union. But the question is, are we going to have very big European Commission, because now we have 28 commissioners, so in that case we would have 35. And previously I mentioned the concept of the limited government. So the idea of having one commissioner per one member state in the perspective of enlarged European Union, even with 2 or 3 new states, is just not realistic, because then the Commission is trying to produce new policies. So now we're talking about animal welfare or extended policy perception of equality and gender it's just not right. So first we should work on ourselves, and then we need to have a clear perspective as well.
Thank you. Deputy Minister, when it comes to accession, everyone knows that the Western Balkan countries has been in the front door for decades, and it is more than obvious that there's no such thing as a fast-track accession procedure for countries like Ukraine, even considering the tragical outcome of the war between the two nations. What do you think? What are the possibilities of an EU accession at this point?
Well, the possibilities are more limited, I think, realistically than what should be desirable. To go back also to your previous question to my colleague here, the Western Balkans, without a question, it has been a long Hungarian political purpose and goal to help the integration of the Western Balkans, the entire Western Balkans, including Serbia. I want to pointedly underline that without Serbia's involvement, there is no long-term stability on the Balkans. And we strongly believe that we should bring in the entire region and use the European integration, use membership finally and again for what it was originally designed for, which is to bring closer together countries, even with a heavy past or a difficult history of animosity or even warfare, like in the case of Yugoslavia, it's a very clear example. To use European integration, to use the open border cooperation as a pacifying force, as an economically understandable and good mechanism and tool to bring them together, help raise living standards and stabilize the region. It's an evident Hungarian national interest. It's our immediate neighborhood. And I must say that nations of Central and Eastern Europe, in my opinion, were obviously and evidently happier when they were in one way or another together, cooperating with open borders, with cooperation, than when they were separated, with heavy animosity and hatred and jealousy, etc., etc. Just not good for any of us. And we are very determined and convinced that should be the way forward. For Ukraine, we don't see a realistic chance for membership, and we don't support, especially not the accelerated EU membership into the Ukrainian membership into the EU now, with the war unresolved for the moment, with the economic and financial costs. It's just a totally mistaken road to push for that. That's another mistake, by the way, in my opinion, of the current Brussels elite. My opinion is that for Ukraine, although it's we're already beyond that, but working for EU membership and economic ties instead of militarily working too closely towards NATO would have been a much better path. But that's the past already. We're beyond that now. So yes, helping Ukraine to pacify, to make a deal, a political deal about peace and stability for Europe with Russia. That's inevitable. That's what we're working on, and we see about cooperation on that level later on.
Thank you, Stefano. What's your take on this?
Well, first and foremost, Montenegro. That's the first country that I would immediately admit into the EU, as I think their accession as has been said by several people, including in the Hungarian government, is long overdue. And why do I say Montenegro specifically? Because they are the one country that has fulfilled the most criteria for accession. I think the question of EU accession must be based on those criteria. Currently, the Western Balkans are miles ahead because they have started the procedures before. They have incorporated a lot more of the acquis communautaire into their legal systems. And while I do understand the motivations for some people to support giving priority to Ukraine, I do not share them as I believe EU accession is and must be done, as it has always been done, by the letter of the law, according to whether that country has fulfilled the conditions set forward by the EU itself and the member states. And as we presently stand, the Western Balkans are ahead. That does not mean that other countries, not only Ukraine, you also have Moldova, you also have Georgia, that are currently in the process of negotiating their own accession. That does not mean that they should not join. Quite the opposite. I believe the European Union, as has always been the goal, is intended to comprise all sovereign states within Europe, provided that they fulfill the conditions that are required for accession.
Thank you so much. And I have to wrap up the first and the biggest part of the conversation. However, we have still some time for one or two questions. If there is any, now's the time to shoot it. Father?
This is an open question, and thank you very much. I actually learned a bit, and perhaps this is an ambiguous question, but what is the solution to limit this elitism in Brussels? How would we get there, if there is a solution?
What's the solution to the elitism in Brussels was the question. Well, I think we just have to stick to basics and talk to the people, European people, and try to represent people's interests. Talk very plainly about things and explain why we say what we say, why we think what we think, and listen to the people's needs, and then take that to Brussels, take it to the European Parliament. That's what we're trying to do there in the parliamentary politics there, but also take it to the level of the Council and to political discourse in Europe, which is around political decisions. So public discourse, discussions, articles, publications, talk very plainly about what really people's needs are, very directly, without any ado or unnecessary, political marketing. Just talk directly about that and try to make it into political reality. That's what my approach would be.
There was another question. Oh.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a very controversial question about European political unity here. We talk a lot about Brussels, we talk a lot about Strasbourg, but sitting here in Budapest, right, we have a real center of historical European unity here as well. So when you're looking at issues of sovereignty and unity in Europe, are there members of the European Parliament or other governments who are looking at sort of the extended deep history of unity among European governments, or is a lot of the conversation really just sort of post mid-20th century social democratic systems, or is there an interest in looking for solutions from deeper in European history?
If I may add a quick anecdote about it, I have lost count over my years in Brussels of how many times I've heard German Eurocrats and people in the European Parliament making comparisons between the EU and the Holy Roman Empire in both positive and negative ways. So take from that what you will. That being said, their historiographic memory is very strongly based on post-war, kind of a clean sheet theory. And if you do a more thorough study of, for example, the House of European History, which is the museum that the EU created to celebrate their vision of European history de facto begins when the European Union is founded. Anything before that is consigned to these two little rooms to show how bad nationalism was. And, oh yeah, there were 1,000 years of history before that, but here's where the real deal is. And then the next 4 floors are about European integration. So that's my take.
Thank you. one more.
I've lived in Budapest for many years, but I'm also English, of course. What's important and what I see in Europe today, which has been very different, is the rise of right-wing parties. The fact that AfD is strong in Germany, the fact that Le Pen is strong in France, the fact that in Britain, the Conservatives and Labour are almost off the map, being replaced by Reform. And I think the reality of today is that it doesn't matter what the European Union says, life is going to change. And it's changing because there is a fundamental problem in most societies now in terms of it being a dangerous communities. And nobody recognises that. Hungary's fine, we're fine here, we live safely. The safest cities in Europe are all based now in Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, every place is a disaster. There's places in London you cannot go at night now. And I think that will become more and more to the fore in the future. And just one last point, the way Trump came in, and I call him the 800-pound gorilla, because he comes in with a business mind, not a political mind, and just tell von der Leyen, this is what you're going to accept on tariffs. I don't care what you say. Take it or leave it. And that's going to be the mentality of negotiation over the next few years.
Excuse me, was it a question? It's a comment. Okay. If I perceive it.
Do you see the change in the people moving more towards the right?
All right.
There's been a major factor in people changing the EU, not the institution changing the EU.
Oh yeah. Thank you, and thank you for the comment. And actually, since our time is up, I think we have to wrap this up. So thank you very much for the contributions and also for the questions and the comment. And thank you everyone, and I wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.